Today we are doing a special episode on the story of LACNETS. We've invited several guests who will share about the history of LACNETS and how LACNETS has come to be how it is now. First, we have Donna Gavin, sister of founder Giovanna Joyce Imbesi and the first board member of LACNETS. Donna, you obviously knew Giovanna very well. Would you mind telling us a bit about Giovanna and what type of person she was?
Yes, thanks, Lisa. I'm really glad to be here with you as well. So, my sister Giovanna had a bright spirit and this incredible balance of warmth, intelligence, and determination. She was a talented musician from a really young age and was passionately devoted to practice and study. So, growing up, Giovanna's piano playing filled our home in New York. She was precocious, adventurous, and tenacious. I'm smiling when I say that. I think the one thing I see as a thread in her life is how she brought people together and inspired collaboration. She knew the importance of community and that together we're so much more than the individuals. So she did this as a musician, as a businesswoman, and as the founder and leader of LACNETS. She had a successful career as a pianist and composer. She established a jazz club when she was just 24. She performed internationally, toured with top bands, managed a recording studio, and then moved towards this idea of how can all this come together to serve other people and something bigger. And that was all the lead up to LACNETS.
Wow, thank you for painting such a beautiful picture of her spirit and her rich and full life. And Donna, you were there from the beginning, even before LACNETS and Generate Possibility was founded in 2012. Would you share with us a little bit about Generate Possibility and LACNETS and what Giovanna's vision was for Generate Possibility and what led her to eventually found Generate Possibility and LACNETS?
Sure. So first, I just have to pause on the name Generate Possibility because that just is so much of what she wanted to do. So she had a business background, she had an MBA, and she learned that these types of activities and projects needed something to hold them as an entity. And Generate Possibility was the entity that she created for that. I think the initial impetus for LACNETS really came directly from her experience of being misdiagnosed and then newly diagnosed and looking for information. And she so wanted to share all that so that other people could have a better experience if they found themselves diagnosed with neck cancer.
Wow, thanks for that. And from your perspective as a sister and the first board member, what was LACNETS like in those beginning stages?
Well, it evolved. It evolved from this initial connection between Giovanna and Dr. Wolin and their conversations about what a patient might need, what kind of community there was and wasn't out there. So it evolved just from two people coming together and saying, how can we build a community? How can our experience serve other people?
It must have been amazing to watch the evolution. And Donna, I'm curious, did you imagine it would be what it is today? And how do you think Giovanna would feel about where LACNETS is today?
Well, I know that Giovanna was enormously proud of what the community of LACNETS was able to accomplish together and the number of people that were being served. And of course, her vision was always the biggest one. So I can't even say, though, that she could have imagined that it would have grown to what it is today. But in hindsight, there were things that she had done in her life that were models. For example, she had a salon at her studio where she invited really renowned composers to speak to people and share their experience and their process and what they learned. And they were informal and intimate. And I saw that in the first LACNETS meetings as well, where expert speakers were brought in, and it was an intimate group, maybe just 10 or 12 people in a room that were able to really learn in a safe space and ask questions, be vulnerable. And so I see the similarity, and the success of the salons maybe should have been a clue of what was to come with LACNETS.
Thank you for sharing your story. Now we welcome Josh Mailman. Josh is the president of NorCal Carcinet, a fellow advocate, mentor, and a dear friend. Josh, it's really great to have you here today, and we know that you were a really close friend to Giovanna, and she considered you someone who she looked up to, a mentor and a friend. So let's take us back a few years or so. How did you first meet Giovanna?
Well, I think with time things get fuzzy, and you know, it's kind that she looked up to me, but you know, we were colleagues. We worked with each other, and that's really the important thing here. Is that we worked as a team, as friends. And you know, I was trying to think back with you a little bit earlier this afternoon, and trying to really examine when I first met her, because this was someone who I just thought was always in my life. But if I look back at it, you know, there was a set of two conferences, I believe, in 2011. One was sponsored by the Carcinoid Awareness Group, and the other was by the Caring for Carcinoid, that happened both in LA, I think in June and December of 2011. I could be off on the year a little bit. But at that time, there wasn't really a cohesive or coherent support group structure in Los Angeles anymore. And I think it was Dr. Wolin at some point who was looking for someone, or said in a meeting, you know, I wish someone would step up and really help in this area. And that's where Giovanna stepped up and really started to try to figure out how to do that. And as we were looking back at this, I think it was the summer of 2012 or fall of 2012, where she called me up after meeting me at those two conferences and said, you know, I'd like that you're running a successful support organization in Northern California. I want to learn. Do you mind? I'm going to be in the area. Do you want to go have lunch? And so I kidded with you a little earlier that there's this place about a mile away from my house that anyone who comes here for the first time and asked to pick my brain about any topic NETs, I take to. And so we went and had lunch, and as we would subsequently do many a times, we closed the place down. I mean, I think they stopped lunch at 3 o'clock and we kept going after that. But we just sat down and started talking about what's important in running a support organization. And the big thing that I told her, and honestly that I tell anyone, so you don't have to come up here and take me to lunch, is consistency is really important. That the idea of running support groups and running communities, it's really important to be consistent about what you're doing so that people know you're going to be there. And I think one of the challenges for most of our support organizations is they're not consistent. And when people don't know you're going to be in a place, you know, they don't know when to show up, and it fails. And I think that was really our talk about how to build consistency in what we were doing and what that would look like. And it would be a riff that we would talk about throughout the years. Not that, you know, Giovanna's musical, so riffing on a topic is pretty easy with Giovanna.
Wow, Josh, thanks for that piece of advice to Giovanna and to all of us, because that's really helpful, and she was lucky to have you. So we're wondering too, what was Giovanna's vision like at the beginning?
Well, this was an area where, look, Los Angeles is a very big market. Southern California is clearly one of the population capitals of the country, and it faces some of the same challenges that every other community faces, in that a lot of the support organizations are patient run. And when a patient is either ill or you lose a patient, that organization starts to fall apart, and it stops meeting regularly, and it stops really being vital, right? It's important that while certainly Giovanna and many of us are fairly large personalities in the neuroendocrine tumor world, but it can't be about us. It has to be about that consistency and about building something that can be a lasting legacy and that can continue even when you're traveling for treatment or traveling for fun, right? I mean, these things shouldn't be built on the existence of you, because they don't last long. And so I think part of the vision was, how do we build something that can sustain itself and that can continue to run and have that consistency? And it's a challenge that many support groups face and support group leaders face, is that part about, certainly when you're building a volunteer or a small nonprofit, it is about your personal capital in putting this in, but at the same time, trying to figure out how to build it so that other people can run it and continue to provide the services even after, well, even while you're enjoying your life, which is what you should be doing, but even after you're gone. Because it's one of the things I tell patients who are newly diagnosed is, none of us are going to live forever, and it's important to really understand that whether you have this disease or you don't have this disease, you have to plan on what's next and make sure that is ready to go.
Yeah, planning is important. And I know that you mentioned that you saw Giovanna as colleagues, and she often said to me how she looked up to you and looked to you, not just as a friend, but really saw you as a mentor. And sometimes I'd be in the room with her. She'd be over at my house, and you'd call her, and she would definitely, pick up the phone because she wanted to be there anytime you called. So your relationship was really special to her. Would you care to expand a little bit more on your relationship with her?
So, all patients, well, all friends go through phases, and this was more than just, call up and get advice for how to run a support group. Giovanna was a special person, and I know certainly she was struggling at times with her health and at various times. And I'm from LA, so not in this pandemic world that we're in, but in the general times, I would be down in Los Angeles 2 or 3 times a year at least to visit my own family, besides the times that there were conferences and things. And we live fairly close, or my family lives fairly close to where she lived in Venice, and certainly I used to work in Venice, so I'm no stranger to the area. And I would check in and say, let's just meet for coffee and just talk about whatever you need to talk about. And I know one of the things we talked about a lot was treatment and treatment decisions and how to go about doing that. So it was more than just, how to run a support group, but we would talk just about what we were both facing and how to strategize about what was next. I enjoyed those talks apparently as much as she did, because it was all enlightening to try to understand different decisions that we were both making and how you would go through that thinking process. And I think a lot of, I'm not a doctor, and certainly Giovanna wasn't a doctor either, but more importantly was more of understanding the thought process that you would go through when talking for that second or third opinion, or how to evaluate those opinions and how to work through that. And I think it carried for both of us, not only to our own, what we did in our own health, but also how we worked with our groups and how we talked to our groups about what our options were.
Yeah, you were a sounding board for her on many levels.
Yeah.
And I know that not only did you come down here and visit, she would spend summers up there, as she had spent decades of her life. So the Bay Area and Marin County, was someplace she spent a lot of time. So she got to see you regularly.
Yeah, no, anytime that she was up here, we would figure out how to meet in new and different places. And she often brought her dog with her, and we met. I was looking the various different places we've met over the years. We've met in somewhere called near the Richmond Plunge, which is this really cool place. And we met near the Rosie the Riveter museum one time, where we sat out and talked. And I think that the hallmarks to that is that we often close down places. We always met for lunch or early or late coffee, and they usually always close by 3. And we should learn by now that never to meet a place that closes by 3, because we never finish by then. And so it was a consistent thread throughout all of our meetings. And often it was talking about our own health, but often it was the health of our community as well. Certainly I remember, and certainly a couple of times that she came up here for Ask of GI, about having other conversations about support organizations. And I remember walking through San Francisco and talking to her on the phone, and sitting down, outside a cafe and talking about various aspects. So we would get into these long, not heated conversations, but these long intellectual conversations about what types of things we should do together, or that would be good for either of our groups. There was a time that I was having therapy or some meeting in Europe, and she took over running my group for one time. And honestly, she was pretty ill at the time, and she still was up here and took over it. And that went on to meeting in various different places. I mean, I think one of my best memories is in her last year of life, when we were in Barcelona at LACNETS together, and somehow she managed to go and do. And besides the fact that we were in Germany together, we were in Barcelona and did a cooking class together with a lot of really great friends. Ron Hollander was there. Dr. Del Rivera was there, to name a few, who were at this cooking lessons. And it was, the joy that was there was just palpable.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. I was just going to say, bring up that this extended beyond California and, globally, right? The places you would meet up with her, including that experience that she treasured.
Yeah, that experience was pretty interesting, because we met at Frankfurt Airport, and we were driving. I had come from Korea, and she was coming from. It was exciting. Exciting maybe isn't the right word, but it was quite the experience. And I think we were together for 3 or 4 days there before we went down to Barcelona, as we were exploring other options or therapy options for Giovanna, and running her in and out of the Frankfurt airport was very entertaining.
Yeah, well, thanks for this trip down memory lane. And from all of this, it's clear that you had this really rich, both personal and then collegial, professional relationship. And you're really, looking at not just, implications personally of treatment decisions, but how to impact the NET community globally. And you already touched on building legacy. So my last question for you is, what do you see as Giovanna's legacy and the impact that she's had on the NET community as a whole?
So, I mean, we talked about, building resources or building blocks for patients. And one of the things from one of the meetings that we were at together was for the Healing Net meeting, where the inception for Net Vitals came. And if you look at what was done there with you, as well as Dan Lee and the entire team at LACNETS as well, that was started because we cared about patients, right? We cared about what type of information they could give. And it wasn't just for the LACNETS community, it was for a larger community. It was for the community as a whole. And I think that's, if you look at the lasting legacy of Giovanna and what she's created, is that it wasn't just for the Southern California community. It was thinking maybe being local, but thinking global. And it really was something that was important for the community as a whole to have and to understand that patient experience and to, set up, whether it's LACNETS or Net Vitals, something that will live on and that will impact patients in their journey for years and decades to come.
Wow, I really love how you summarize that. Really, taking that patient experience and being local, but thinking global. And that really sums up what Giovanna was all about. Thank you so much, Josh, for joining us today.
No worries. Glad to be here.
We're honored today to welcome Dr. Edward Wolin, medical oncologist and director of the Center for Carcinoid and Neuroendocrine Tumors at the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. He was the inaugural speaker of the LACNETS Patient Educational Speaker Series with the launch of LACNETS 8 years ago, back in 2012. Dr. Wolin worked very closely with our founder and executive director emeritus, Giovanna Joyce Imbesi, as a featured speaker for many of the monthly meetings and the annual patient education conferences. Giovanna and Dr. Wolin shared a passion to help the NET community, as well as a love for music. Dr. Wolin is a NET expert and personal physician to many patients. He's also a colleague and fellow advocate, and he's a friend. He's a friend to Giovanna, to LACNETS, and to the whole NET community. Welcome, Dr. Wolin.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Edward Wolin. I'm a medical oncologist, actually a neuroendocrine oncologist, and I've been taking care of people with neuroendocrine cancers for over 25 years as my major activity. I was at Cedars-Sinai for many years before I ended up in New York, where I'm now the director of the Carcinoid and Neuroendocrine Tumor Center at Mount Sinai. I was previously at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles for many, many years before I moved to New York, and was involved in the founding of LACNETS with Giovanna Imbesi in 2012. And the last time I spoke to this illustrious group was in the inaugural meeting in 2012. And Giovanna and I have been in very close touch for many, many years. I first met her in 2009, and the last time I saw her was in 2018, which was about a year before she passed away, unfortunately. And she's just been an incredible force in the world of neuroendocrine cancer, a huge inspiration to patients and an inspiration to all of her doctors as well, with her amazing attitude, her cheerfulness, her creativity, her musical contributions to healing have all been just wonderful. And I think we owe a great big debt of gratitude to her. And if it were not for her, we wouldn't have the LACNETS organization. She's really an inspiration.
And now we have Dr. Hendafar, the director of the Neuroendocrine Tumor Program at Cedars. He was Giovanna's physician and collaborated with LACNETS for quite a while, and he's been a really dear friend to Giovanna and to LACNETS. Welcome, Dr. Hendafar. I know you were close to Giovanna, and so we'd love to hear from you. I guess turning back the clock to, we think, the beginning of 2015 when you took over as the director of the Neuroendocrine Tumor Program, and perhaps even before that, what were your first impressions of Giovanna, and what was your relationship with Giovanna like?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really appreciate being able to contribute to this conversation and in memoriam to discuss Giovanna and LACNETS in general. I remember my first impression with her was that she was a very formidable woman. She was, very special, very nice, caring, and thoughtful. But at the same time, she had this unbelievable amount of knowledge about neuroendocrine tumors. And so that was, as a physician, when you're used to having an area of expertise that the patient doesn't necessarily share, it kind of made the relationship seem more, I guess, equal, or just a different type of relationship, I would say. And that's something, actually, it's interesting that the organization she founded, LACNETS, has helped create thousands of patients who are incredibly well informed. So your relationship, instead of having to teach somebody, the relationship with the provider changes a little bit, and it's more of a consultation, a discussion, a back and forth, and a mutual kind of learning. And I also remember that she was just very, very talented. She was a musician, made beautiful music. She had created a successful organization. She seemed like she had friends everywhere. I mean, everybody knew Giovanna, and she knew everybody. So I think those are my first impressions of her.
Thanks for sharing. She certainly was special and very striking. So I'm also curious to hear, how did you get involved with LACNETS? And then what were your first impressions of LACNETS like, and how did you see it grow and change over the years?
My first interactions were, I know LACNETS and Cedars had a very special relationship in the beginning, as Edward Wolin and Giovanna Imbesi. I don't think they necessarily co-founded it, but they kind of were organizing a lot of efforts at the same time. And there was at that time, I think it was a monthly program, advocacy meeting, where the patients would come, a support group meeting, where the patients would come into Cedars physically and meet and talk. And it was there where I first was introduced to LACNETS and got to know many of the key members, Giovanna and Edward Wolin. At that time, I was a gastrointestinal medical oncologist at Cedars. And in my own training, I hadn't had that much teaching and learning about neuroendocrine tumors. So kind of that's where that area of expertise began for me as well.
Yeah, I remember you were speaking the first time I went to a LACNETS meeting, and you certainly have been super supportive and very involved and collegial. So how did you see LACNETS grow and change over the years?
Yeah, so LACNETS has grown quite a bit. So when we first started, I think it was more of a support group. Now I think it's more of an advocacy group. And these words, have different meanings to different people. But what I would say has changed is that before was a way for people to kind of connect to each other and, support each other and help each other. And from that, I think it grew an organization that's dedicated to neuroendocrine tumor advocacy. So now it seems like the foundation has been built for an organization that supports neuroendocrine tumor patients through every aspect of their journey. Whereas I think in its beginning, it was more of a support group. I think that's probably how a lot of advocacy organizations start. And, today LACNETS has grown, has become such an important resource for patients. So they're able to get the types of information they need, second opinions, consultations, day-to-day help with their problem. There's a lot of education that happens at LACNETS with their yearly conferences. They still continue their support group meetings, so that's good. So there's still that aspect of getting patients together to help each other out, which is so important. And then, LACNETS has been working, I think, with pharmaceutical partners to help to better understand neuroendocrine tumor patients and what their needs are and how to best serve them. And I'm not sure if you get going on Capitol Hill, but I'm sure that's in the near future when you go and lobby on behalf of neuroendocrine tumor patients as well, to make sure they get the support. And, when a small group of patients has a tough problem, they need a voice. And I think LACNETS, it's done a great job of being that voice for this group. And I think LACNETS has become, despite starting, I think, in Los Angeles, has now become almost a national organization, right? So that's pretty exciting. Might have to change the name at some point.
I mean, thanks for sharing. Yeah, thanks for just describing all that. That's certainly all of these things that Giovanna dreamed of, and she would be so proud. So back in 2019, you reached out to us and you contacted us kind of behind Giovanna's back, and you told us that you wanted to honor Giovanna with a special award. So tell us a bit about that award and what inspired you to do this and what that award meant.
Well, Giovanna had done so much, and it was clear that, her accomplishments and what she's done, deserved to be honored and respected. And we were able to give her an award that year at the LACNETS meeting. We were able to bring everyone together to honor and respect what she's accomplished. I think it's important to consider in the context of having the disease she did. we wanted to make sure that, she was able to enjoy that and she would hear it when, at that time and place, and not have it, in a situation where we weren't able to. So I'm so glad we were able to do that. I'm so glad we were able to express, sometimes in the day-to-day, you want to take the opportunity to express how you feel about somebody, and you aren't able to do that. And I think we're all very fortunate that on that day, we all got an opportunity to just, give her appreciation and give her thanks for what she accomplished in developing LACNETS. So that felt really good. It felt like the right thing to do.
Yeah, her expression, her surprise was priceless when you awarded her with that.
Yeah. She's
Giovanna,
always wondering who she's going to award and who she's going to recognize, right?
that's right. She's thinking of others. And for you to come up with that. Yeah, the Giovanna Imbesi Cedars-Sinai Patient Leadership Award.
Yeah.
And that whole slideshow that we did for her. It was amazing. It was such a touching moment.
It really was. I mean, she deserved it. I can't tell you how many people's lives she's touched. And still to this day, her name comes up every day. And not even when I speak to the LACNETS group, when I talk to our patients, her name always comes up. She's touched so many people. And, her legacy, I think, definitely continues on with what you're doing, Lisa, and Lindsay, and Mary Dunleavy, and everybody else at LACNETS. And then just all the people that she's talked to, they feel like they have to pass it forward, the love and the care and the respect and the desire to build a better future. I think she's passed on that kind of those core beliefs to thousands of people, and hopefully they'll continue that to this day. So I think the award was the least we could do to recognize such an accomplishment, and we were happy to do it.
It's so beautiful, and what a way to honor her. And perfect segue. I know you already talked a little bit about what you see as her legacy and people wanting to pay it forward. What else do you see as her legacy and the greater impact she's made on the larger neuroendocrine tumor community as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, as I get older and kind of reflect on what I would like to be able to leave in this world and put, Giovanna's accomplishments in that context, I think the greatest thing she was able to accomplish was her relationships and her connections with you and Lindsay and the other LACNETS board members, and just that it was her idea. She created this idea. I mean, she created it, but the idea came out of a need and came out of an issue that she personally dealt with. And as a leader, she came up with this, this idea and this vision that she had, and she was able to share it. And I think now the vision stands and continues. And although she created it, the vision will continue to develop and change and become something, just bigger than any of us. And I think that's her legacy. She was able to start the ball rolling, and now, and she got the right people and the right situation to kind of help continue that and develop it. And I'm sure the vision's going to change. I don't know if Giovanna, what she had in mind is what's going to happen in the future. I doubt it. All these things, they change and they develop, and it's up to the next generation to kind of take the legacy and move on with it.
Wow. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing those beautiful memories.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Dr. Dan Lee is a NET expert and medical oncologist at the City of Hope, where he serves as co-director of the Neuroendocrine Tumor Program. You were an integral part of the LACNETS growth and expansion in Southern California as you hosted LACNETS annual conferences and started our tradition of the annual NET Cancer Day symposiums at the City of Hope. Welcome, Dr. Lee. So take us back to how this all happened. Tell us how you heard about LACNETS and how you first met Giovanna and your initial impressions of Giovanna and LACNETS.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for having me. So I met Giovanna almost 5 years ago. So I was coming out of my fellowship training at Memorial Sloan Kettering and accepted a position here at City of Hope to further develop the liver cancer as well as neuroendocrine tumor programs. And I remember having our first conference, which was specifically intended for our patients here at City of Hope dealing with neuroendocrine tumors. And our featured guest at that time was Giovanna, because we had heard about all of the exciting work that she was doing for the Los Angeles community as well as beyond. So that was really kind of our first instance. And I would say from the moment that I met her, it was really to try to see how we can continue to evolve LACNETS as well as City of Hope as an organization as a whole to really be able to reach and better help our neuroendocrine tumor patients here in Los Angeles as well as beyond. So that quickly then transformed to doing a lecture for LACNETS, really understanding how clinical trials work. And I think that topic is still an area that continues to really help our patients in the neuroendocrine tumor community. And then, quickly after that, it was really being able to transition to host the annual conference for LACNETS here at City of Hope in 2017. And that conference, I feel, was really the first time that LACNETS was able to think about expansion. And I think that was really important because that was a very important conference where not only patients with GI neuroendocrine tumors were attending the conference, but we had patients with paragangliomas, we had patients with lung neuroendocrine tumors. So really showcasing the diversity and really the potential reach that LACNETS could have in terms of its impact on patients. And I really feel that Giovanna really did this. She was willing to be able to emphasize and start upon that expansion process. And we've continued to have those discussions. I remember being at the airport with Giovanna one time while we were traveling to the Healing Net conference and everything. And we really, talked about how can we dream bigger, right? We always thought that we could do more together. And as a result of that, I am really happy and really impressed by how far LACNETS have come underneath her leadership, as well as your leadership, Lisa, in terms of taking it even beyond. And I think it's really due to the fact that Giovanna really bought into our passion here at City of Hope, bought into my vision as well, and then coordinated with her overall broader vision, which was really to have a significant impact on everyone's life for all of our patients that are dealing with neuroendocrine tumors.
Thank you for that. I remember those early meetings, that meeting at City of Hope and that clinical trials webinar or seminar where you came to Cedars to talk about clinical trials, and then that first conference. And ever since then, 5 years ago and all the way through now, you're always encouraging us to dream big. And that's something you and I and Giovanna always shared, to reach for the stars. So, speaking of dreaming big, let's talk a bit about Net Vitals. Would you share with the audience how Net Vitals came about and what's happened with that?
Sure. So I would say Net Vitals has been led by Giovanna. I think she was one of the patient advocates who recognized that in order to improve the care of patients with neuroendocrine tumors, there has to be a way for better connection and trust between the patient as well as the physician provider. And I think that was the integral background behind the development of Net Vitals. Through our discussions together, what we recognized was that there was a disconnect, and we didn't understand potentially where the problem was. And I think what we hypothesized was that there was a lack of communication in terms of true, honest communication between a patient who has a diagnosis of neuroendocrine tumor and their physician providers. So that's really where we came up with the idea of Net Vitals. So Net Vitals is a patient self-assessment, which allows them to recognize areas of the disease that they may know or they may not know. And this really helps the patient facilitate potentially better communication with their providers. And this was done in conjunction with LACNETS under Giovanna's leadership, where we formed these set of questions that we felt were very important for patients in terms of their understanding of their neuroendocrine tumor diagnosis and potential questions that they may be able to discuss with their medical providers. And when we did this as an initial pilot feasibility study, what we found was that patients were willing to take the self-assessment. And in addition to that, not only was it feasible, but they were very satisfied. And in addition, we also found that there were significant knowledge gaps in terms of what patient understood after their visits with their providers, and that there was really a need, a knowledge gap where we can continue to improve upon so that ultimately there's better understanding for the patients and then better communication with their providers, hopefully to lead to improvement in outcomes for all our patients with neuroendocrine tumors.
Thanks for that. So the better communication will lead to better care and hopefully better treatment and quality of life. And so lastly, I'm really curious, I know you touched on the geographical expansion of LACNETS and also expansion to different types of NET. How else have you seen LACNETS evolve over the years? And as we continue to dream big together, how do you hope to see it continue to evolve in the future?
Yeah, I would say, I think this has been one of the good side effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. It really forced a lot of us in oncology, as well as LACNETS, to potentially come on in terms of a virtual platform. And I think LACNETS has definitely taken advantage of that and to really, dream big and further expand their reach. So, traditionally, we have had guests or guest speakers at the monthly meetings that LACNETS have always hosted in the Los Angeles area. But by going virtual, that allowed LACNETS to tap into experts, not only around the United States, but also around the world as well. And as a result of that, now there is attendees from all areas across the United States, as well as other parts of the world, who are tuning in to the monthly meetings that LACNETS hosts with an expert speaker on a specific topic. And I think that's really the next generation in terms of evolving and continue to be able to dream big. And I really hope that this continues to be pushed moving forward, because certainly I think this has really evolved not only in terms of a patient advocacy group, but has really become a patient advocacy as well as education group, which I think was always Giovanna's original dream and everything. And I'm really proud to see that her legacy is being carried out by LACNETS to really have a global reach, not just a Los Angeles reach.
Thank you for all that. Thank you for inspiring us to dream big, and together we will continue to dream big and carry on Giovanna's legacy. Giovanna certainly was an extraordinary person. Speaking of extraordinary people, I want to now introduce Kavya Vellakkapudi, our second board member, the interim executive director in 2018 when Giovanna had surgery, and again in 2019 after Giovanna passed. She is now our executive director. Kavya, most people don't know how long you've been with LACNETS and your long-standing history with Giovanna and LACNETS. So we invite you now to share.
Giovanna and I were introduced by a common friend in 2015. I just started to work independently as a fundraising consultant. It was at a time when LACNETS was transitioning from a small group that ran with no funding to a regional group that does require funding. She needed help writing a grant. We wrote it together and received our first grant award. We continued to work over the years to raise funding for Generate Possibility and LACNETS. Giovanna was one of the warmest people you could ever meet. She had a way of making others feel heard. Like many others whose lives she touched, I felt a connection with her immediately. And that connection, brought us to work together over the years. Soon after, she invited me to join the board. For a long time, it was just the two of us brainstorming ideas, researching fundraising opportunities, and looking for free and donated services and products wherever we can to save every penny for a rainy day. And Giovanna quickly realized, though, that she needs extra support to keep the programs growing that were now reaching hundreds more patients and caregivers than back in 2015. She was volunteering more than full-time at the time, and there was always something more to do. Giovanna asked if I knew anyone who could join LACNETS to help manage programs. So we it went from maybe serving 10, 20 patients to hundreds at the conference every year. I knew Lindsay through another organization I was consulting with at the time. I knew Giovanna and Lindsay would work well together. They're both so warm, welcoming, and hardworking. That's when I introduced Giovanna to Lindsay.
That leads us to our next guest, Lindsay Judavine, our Director of Communications. Lindsay, share with us a little bit about your history with LACNETS. Why did you decide to work with LACNETS, and what were your first impressions of LACNETS?
Yeah, hi. So I was hired in early 2016 as a temporary event planner for the annual NET conference at Cedars-Sinai. And I remember being so impressed with Gio and what she created by herself as a one-person team. I had an instant connection with Giovanna. I'll never forget the first time I met her, which was for my interview for the interim event planning position with LACNETS. We met at a local coffee shop near me in San Diego, and she brought her dog Dolce with her to the interview. I'm a big dog person, so we connected instantly over that. The interview felt more like catching up with an old friend. She was so warm-hearted and genuine. This interview was where I first learned about neuroendocrine cancer and the importance of LACNETS as a support group and education group. After our hour-and-a-half coffee chat, I was hoping she would hire me for the position, not only because I felt like I was a great fit for the job, but also because I just adored Giovanna and our instant connection. It just felt right. And as we all know, I was hired for the position, but a little side story before I was officially hired. A week after the interview, a week after I met with Giovanna, while I was still waiting on her decision, my boyfriend's mom at the time, who I was very close with, was diagnosed with cancer. They called me to come to their house so they could tell us more. And they explained to me it was a rare type of cancer called carcinoid or neuroendocrine tumor or something. They were just as confused as I was. But then that is when everything made sense. Everything was meant to be. I was hired as the event planner for LACNETS, and my boyfriend's mom started to attend every single LACNETS meeting and conference that she could. She was connected with the top NET experts because of LACNETS. It was amazing to see the impact of LACNETS firsthand to someone close to me. So to circle back to your initial question, LACNETS blew me away. The need of a support group and access to education around this uncommon disease was clearly needed, and Giovanna made it a reality.
Wow, what a story. Kind of like what Donna was saying, Giovanna had a way of bringing people together, and it was all meant to be. So just curious, Lindsay, how did you turn from a temporary event planner to a permanent LACNETS fixture?
Yeah, so, well, I would first like to say I'm so incredibly grateful that I get to call LACNETS my job. It feels weird to call what we do a job because it feels too important and something we do to continue on what Giovanna built and envisioned. While I missed working with Gio every single day, we also have grown into a small and mighty team of amazing and inspiring women, truly. So back to your question, how did I turn into a permanent LACNETS fixture? LACNETS just keeps growing and growing, and we reach more and more patients and their loved ones around the world. When I started with LACNETS, we were regional, reaching patients and caregivers in LA, Orange County, and San Diego. And that seemed impressive at the time. And now we are reaching those affected by NETs all over the world. Our reach has exponentially grown since I started as a temporary event planner. My role kept growing into something bigger and bigger as LACNETS kept growing. It's been almost 7 years since I was the temporary event planner. And now I'm so honored to be the Director of Communications for LACNETS. And of course, since we are growing so quickly, we needed someone else on the team to assist with programs and beyond, someone with experience and knowledge. And Lisa, that's where you come in. So I'll let you share how you first became involved with LACNETS and your background.
Thank you for that intro, Lindsay. So after my husband was diagnosed with advanced pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor in January 2015, one of my good friends had the good sense to look for a support group in Los Angeles. She found LACNETS through a Google search and talked to Giovanna on the phone for quite some time. And our friend told us all about LACNETS and urged us to attend. But understandably, it was a crazy time for us. And in fact, we actually had surgery planned the day after the meeting. So that schedule didn't work out for us at the time. Fast forward several months after surgery, disease progression, more treatments and procedure. And I remembered my friend mentioning LACNETS, and I thought I'd check it out. So I started attending some of the monthly meetings, and right away I was so amazed by the educational content and the connections made through LACNETS. It was through one of the early meetings that, in fact, I made a connection to a NET expert that ended up changing the course of our treatment journey. I've always been grateful for how instrumental LACNETS has been to us. And like many others, I think this is a common theme, I was really drawn to Giovanna. She was so warm and welcoming. Meeting Giovanna felt like meeting a kindred spirit. She always emphasized how important the connections made through the support groups are, whether it's connections made with others living with NET or with NET experts. These connections might directly affect one's treatment journey, like it did ours, or it might affect one's quality of life. For many, just walking into a room and seeing others living with the same disease who get it is such an emotional experience. Giovanna created the space for people to see and experience the fact that we are not alone. So after I was an active participant for some time, Giovanna invited me to go out to lunch with her one day in 2017. And that's when she invited me to join her on the LACNETS team to help her plan content. And those of us who know Giovanna, and as we've heard today through the stories, we know that she's a visionary, and she wanted LACNETS to grow and expand to reach as many people as possible. She saw my strengths and believed I could help her. And I actually was surprised and also intrigued because I had only ever worked in the clinical setting as a nurse practitioner, and I never imagined working with nonprofits or working with education, advocacy, or support groups. She wasn't sure what this would look like, but together we agreed to dream and reach for the stars together. And dream big we did. With Giovanna's support, we launched the first ever health coaching program for individuals living with NET or their loved ones so they could focus on wellness rather than their disease. At that time, I had just completed my health and wellness coaching program. And at a Healing NET Symposium in 2017, we were inspired together to create NET Vitals. We formed the NET Connect program, a buddy mentorship program, and we also created NET quizzes and blog posts. This was all on top of our monthly educational programs and annual conferences. The funny thing was, unlike Giovanna, I'm someone who gets really nervous talking in front of people. So when I agreed to join her, I gave her the stipulation that I did not have to talk in front of people. It's ironic, right? Because I've definitely always had to talk in front of people, thanks to Giovanna's urging, and even more so now that my role has evolved. And later, when I reminded Giovanna about this stipulation I had given her, she kind of gave me a sly smile and said, "Did I really agree to that?" So I always think that's funny because, you know, Giovanna and this story is an example of how Giovanna saw people's strengths and brought those strengths out. And she also knew when to challenge people so they could grow to their full potential. Giovanna truly had a gift of empowering others, and she absolutely changed my life. Her invitation for me to join LACNETS in the bigger world of NET advocacy was really a big turning point in my life, personally and professionally. And I went from attending NET events and seeing how the information affected my husband to seeing how things affected the greater NET community. Another person who Giovanna befriended and empowered is Mary Dunleavy. Mary Dunleavy is another longtime LACNETS participant, a friend of Giovanna, and she became a board member in 2020. Mary, tell us how you found out about LACNETS and what was that first experience like?
Well, I was diagnosed, now it's almost 17 years ago at the same time actually that Giovanna was. And there was such a small group of us that would run into each other in the waiting room at Cedars doing labs or treatments or getting our monthly injections. And we would spend hours in that waiting room at the time. And thanks to Giovanna, it became a more formal group because she was so interested in building a support system of patients and doctors. And so patients would be able to navigate their diagnosis and treatment a little bit better. So we started meeting in the basement of Cedars. There were about 10 to 12 of us. And it was just to kind of connect with the doctors and networked with other patients, which I don't think any of us realized how much we actually needed at the time. But it truly feels like a lifetime ago now to see where LACNETS is compared to where we started all those years ago.
That's amazing. Tell us also a little bit about your relationship with Giovanna. We understand that you're quite close.
Well, oh my gosh, everybody's descriptions of Gio couldn't be more perfect, really. And I think I'm going to be a little repetitive, but you just couldn't help but be drawn to her. But I was really thinking about why that was for me. And it was because I felt like I was in the presence of someone who really, of someone who really cared, really cared and listened to what you were experiencing. You know, every person dealing with an illness such as cancer just wants to be heard and understood. And everybody deserves to have someone like Gio in their lives. Her investment in other NET patients was inspiring. So I just always knew that she was in my corner, whether I needed to talk about, you know, the emotional aspects and trials and tribulations of the cancer diagnosis or just treatment. But she was there for every aspect of that whenever I needed her. And as the years build, more and more upon the two of us going through a cancer diagnosis, our relationship just became more special and stronger.
Wow, thank you for sharing. She clearly had a deep and meaningful impact on your life.
No doubt.
So how did your connection with LACNETS and your involvement with LACNETS evolve over the years?
Well, that actually is interesting because it really took me a number of years to embrace becoming a part of a quote unquote support group and becoming more involved in LACNETS. For so many years, I guess I didn't want to think of myself as a patient, but Gio helped me realize that I didn't actually have to consider myself a patient, but more just someone that was living with a NET diagnosis. And I also realized that I could share three really important aspects of my experience dealing with this diagnosis with other people. And those three were information, hope, which I can't believe the impact that that can have, and connection. And this is when I realized I was giving back to others exactly what Gio gave to me. And no one inspired me more with this diagnosis than Gio.
Wow, thank you for sharing. And would you kind of expand a little bit about how your own role and involvement has evolved within LACNETS?
Yeah, so, it started out as just kind of helping new patients, or really just being involved in the support group, especially when early on, just talking to new patients that were diagnosed. And then when COVID hit, obviously we went remote. And so we had weekly support groups as opposed to a little more intermittent. And so we started reaching so many more patients. And so we were able to help so many more people. And so I got to talk to a lot more patients about their new diagnosis. And I think that's when I realized how much the hope and connection became so important to patients. So with that said, it was always, after Giovanna passed, it was always really important for me to become more involved and to carry any part of the torch that I could for her. And when I was asked to become a board member with her sister, Donna, who's such an incredibly special person and reminds all of us so much of Gio. So it was just such an honor. And then to join forces with Kavya and Lindsay and Lisa, all of you, has been just a true honor. And I know would make Giovanna so incredibly proud to see what, like you said, the small but mighty group of women have pulled together. So I'm really proud to be a part of it.
Thank you for sharing. Then in November 2019, we shared the sad news of the passing of our founder, executive director, and dear friend, Giovanna Joyce Imbesi. Although we will miss her dearly, Giovanna expressed her desire that we focus on how she lived richly and fully for 14 years with neuroendocrine cancer. She said that she felt her greatest legacy was founding and building LACNETS. So circling back to Kavya, Mary, and Donna, how have you seen our LACNETS family carry on Giovanna's legacy, and what closing thoughts would you like to share with us?
Giovanna brought people together, and in that spirit, everyone came together without being asked to make sure LACNET sustains and grows. It took 5, 6 of us to do everything she was doing alone until that point. I can say that there isn't a day that goes by without our team thinking, what would Giovanna do? Or how would she have handled it? She continues to inspire us every day. Her vision to reach more patients and more caregivers grows stronger and stronger.
That's really well put, Kavya. Thank you. And for me, each person on this team brings some strength and some perspective. And I'm inspired by her model of listening to other people's input and kind of joining heads to come up with the best way forward, even though we're on uncharted territory a little bit. And for the group as a whole, each person carries on by their participation in a meeting or their willingness to lead a group or participate in any way, take a call from another patient or from one caregiver to another in the course of a meeting to share their experience. So we're all together carrying on this legacy and this vision that Giovanna initiated all those years ago.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Donna, because for LACNETS, for me, is I'm obviously part of the founding family as well as being a patient. So it's just an interesting dynamic. And it's just had such a profound impact on me on both sides of that coin. And it's truly a testament to, Gio's impassioned dream of making this happen. She shared with me many years ago her desire to have me involved in LACNETS. And I just have so much pride knowing that we've carried on her legacy like this. I think all of us, and I'm sure Lisa at the top of the list, we feel such a presence of Giovanna every time a patient shares their gratitude of LACNETS with us for helping them navigate their new diagnosis. And we get those thank yous a lot. And I just feel like she would be beaming with pride of the sheer depth and reach that her dream has been realized and will continue to be. And truly during one of the most challenging years we could all have been through. So it just gives me so much pride and joy to see where LACNETS is now and where it will be in the future.
So as we've taken this walk down memory lane and consider carrying on Giovanna's legacy, what closing thoughts would you three like to share?
Well, I just would like to say again how grateful I am as her sister to hear just all these warm remembrances and all this dedication to LACNETS and what she initiated.
And I think I would just say the same, is that it's just so special to be a part of this group of beautiful, strong, powerful women that are making such an impact in so many people's lives. And I just don't see an end in sight, which is pretty exciting. So really, really happy to be involved.
And I would like to thank all of you for keeping LACNETS alive and thriving. And also to our patient and caregiver community for sticking with us and believing in us to take LACNETS forward.
Beautiful sentiments and beautiful stories. Thank you, everyone who joined us today to share the story of LACNETS. And thank you all for all your hard work and dedication, for bringing LACNETS to where it is today, and for the work you're doing to carry on Giovanna's legacy. Thanks for listening to the LACNETS podcast. We want to thank our presenting sponsors, Ipsen Pharmaceutical and Advanced Accelerator Applications. For more information about neuroendocrine cancer, go to www.lacnets.org.